On December 19, 1943, Gefreiter Franz Weber walked the eastern perimeter fence of Stalag III-C prisoner of war camp near Alt-Druitz in German Pomerania. 24 years old. Third year of guard duty. 0 disciplinary incidents. The temperature had dropped to -18 degrees Celsius overnight. Snow lay 3 feet deep across the compound. Frozen ground cracked beneath his boots with each step, sharp sounds in the pre-dawn silence. Steam rose from his breath in clouds that disappeared into darkness. The cold bit through his wool greatcoat, through the layers of uniform beneath, settled into his bones with the particular ache of winter guard duty in Pomerania where the wind came straight off the Baltic with nothing to stop it. He carried a Karabiner 98K rifle across his chest. 5 rounds loaded in the internal magazine. Safety off. Standard procedure. The metal was so cold it burned his fingers through thin gloves when he adjusted his grip. His hands were perpetually numb during winter shifts. His feet too, despite 2 pairs of socks and felt boot liners. The cold was simply part of the job. Something you endured rather than overcame. Behind him, 6,400 Soviet and Polish prisoners slept in wooden barracks designed for 3,000. Overcrowding had worsened systematically since Stalingrad. New prisoners arrived weekly. Sometimes daily. The transport trains came from the Eastern Front carrying men who'd surrendered or been captured during the German retreat. The camp administration had stopped issuing adequate blankets in October. Budget constraints, they said. Priorities elsewhere. Typhus had killed 17 men in November alone. December's count was already at 12 and the month wasn't finished. The bodies were collected each morning from the barracks. Carried to a storage shed near the camp's western wall. Held there until enough accumulated to justify firing up the cremation furnace 3 kilometers away. Sometimes bodies lay in the shed for 5 days before burning. The smell carried across the camp when wind came from the west. Weber had been raised in a farming village 40 kilometers from Munich. Oberammergau. Small community. 43 houses. 1 church. 1 school. Catholic family in a Catholic region where faith was woven into daily life like thread through cloth. His father, Joseph Weber, had fought in the Great War. Returned in 1918 with lung damage from mustard gas attack during Third Battle of Ypres. Coughed blood for 7 years. Died when Franz was 12 years old, drowning in his own fluid-filled lungs while the family watched helplessly. His mother, Maria Weber, worked as a seamstress after Joseph died. Took in mending and alterations from wealthier families in nearby Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Her fingers were permanently scarred from needle pricks. Bent from arthritis by the time Franz was 15. But she kept working. Had to. 2 younger sisters needed food, clothes, shoes that fit. Greta was 10 years younger than Franz. Quiet girl. Loved drawing. Drew flowers and animals in charcoal on scraps of paper their mother brought home. Anna was 8 years younger. Bold where Greta was quiet. Asked questions constantly. Made their mother laugh even when times were hardest. Franz had wanted to stay in Oberammergau. Help his mother. Work as a carpenter's apprentice with her Schmidt who'd known his father. But Maria wouldn't allow it. You need to have a future beyond this village, she'd said. The Wehrmacht will give you training. A salary. Opportunities. He joined in June 1940. Basic training at Grafenwehr. 6 weeks of drilling, shooting, marching, learning military discipline. He was good at following orders. Good at staying quiet and unnoticed. Not ambitious. Not seeking promotion or glory. Just reliable. The kind of soldier officers liked because he didn't cause problems. After basic training, assignment officers reviewed his medical examination. Flat feet. Chronic knee pain from a training march injury where he'd twisted the joint badly and never reported it until it swelled so large he couldn't walk. The officer marked his file, suitable for rear area duty only. Not combat ready. Guard duty at Stalag III-C, assignment came through in August 1940. He'd been there ever since. 3 years, 4 months. Never saw combat. Never fired his weapon at another human being. Never even came close. The eastern perimeter was the longest section of Stalag III-C's defensive fence line. 800 meters of double fence construction. 12-foot wire mesh topped with barbed coils. 10-foot gap between inner and outer fences filled with nothing but frozen ground where guards walked patrol circuits. Guard towers spaced every 100 meters along the perimeter. Searchlights swept the compound on 15-minute intervals, mechanized systems that rotated slowly with grinding sounds audible across the frozen compound. Weber walked this section 6 nights per week. 4-hour shifts from 0400 to 0800. Dawn watch. The coldest hours when body temperature drops lowest and attention drifts most easily. He'd memorized every post, every sight line, every shadow cast by buildings and towers where the searchlights didn't penetrate completely. Knew where ice formed on the wire. Knew which boards in Tower 6 creaked when guards shifted weight. Knew the rhythm of other guards' patrols so he could time his movements to avoid unnecessary conversation. The northeastern corner was the darkest section. Tower 7 stood there with broken searchlight that had stopped working on November 28, maintenance had been notified. Submitted 3 work orders. Promised repairs, within the week, 3 weeks ago. Nothing happened. Budget priorities went to maintaining fences and barracks. A single searchlight on a secondary tower wasn't urgent. Especially when the sector was considered low risk. No buildings nearby. Open ground. Easy sight lines even without the light. Except the darkness created opportunity. Weber had noticed something unusual on December 14, fresh marks in the snow beneath the fence at the northeastern corner. Boot prints leading to and from the wire. Not just one set. Multiple sets. Maybe 3 or 4 different pairs of boots based on the size variations. Someone had been there recently. Testing the fence or examining it for weaknesses or digging beneath it. He'd stopped walking when he saw the marks. Stood there for 30 seconds examining them in the dim light before dawn. The prints were partially filled with fresh snow from overnight wind. Maybe 12 hours old. Maybe less. Made during the previous night shift while Weber had been off duty. Standard procedure was explicit. Report suspicious activity immediately. Summon the duty officer. Increase patrols in that section. Document everything in the shift log with time, location, specific observations. Security protocol was clear because escape attempts were constant. Every month, prisoners tested fences, dug tunnels, attempted to bribe guards, looked for weaknesses in the system. Weber stood there with his rifle and looked at the boot prints in the snow. Made no entry in his shift log. Walked past without comment. Continued his patrol as though nothing unusual had caught his attention. He saw the marks again on December 16. More disturbance in the snow beneath the same section of fence. Someone had worked there again. The inner fence showed signs of manipulation. Cut wire strands twisted back into position, amateur work but careful, done by hands that understood the need for concealment. Someone was systematically working on an escape tunnel or fence breach. Someone patient and methodical. Weber knew what he was supposed to do. Report suspicious activity immediately. Summon the duty officer. Increase patrols in that section. Standard procedure was clear. He did nothing. On December 17, he brought a piece of wire. Thin gauge. Flexible. He left it near the fence post, half buried in snow where it wouldn't be obvious but could be found by someone looking carefully. On December 18, the wire was gone. New marks appeared in the snow. Now, December 19, Weber approached the northeastern corner at 0527. Darkness still covered the compound. Dawn wouldn't break for another hour. He stopped 30 meters from Tower 7 and waited. No movement. No sound except whine through the wire and his own breathing. He walked forward slowly. At the fence, he could see fresh excavation beneath the lowest wire strand. Someone had dug a shallow trench maybe 8 inches deep. Not enough to crawl under yet. Maybe another night's work required. Weber examined the wire mesh. Several strands had been cut cleanly near the bottom. The work was careful. Methodical. He looked back toward the nearest guard tower. Tower 6 was 200 meters south. The guard there faced the other direction, watching the main compound. Tower 7 was 80 meters north with its broken searchlight. The guard up there was probably half asleep. Weber had served enough night shifts to know the rhythm. Attention peaks in the first hour and the last hour. The middle hours drift. Weber knelt beside the fence. He used his bayonet to widen the excavation beneath the wire. Not much. Just enough to make the next stage easier. 2 minutes of work. Then he covered his modifications with fresh snow and continued his patrol. At 0800, his shift ended. He filed his report with the duty sergeant. Northeastern sector quiet. No incidents. The sergeant barely looked at the log sheet. Routine entry. Another uneventful night. Weber slept until 1400. Woke. 8. Read a letter from his mother. She wrote about Christmas preparations. The village church would have midnight mass. She wished he could come home. His sisters were well. Food was rationed but adequate. She asked if he was staying warm. He wrote back that evening. Told her he was healthy. Guard duty was boring but safe. Nothing interesting to report. He didn't mention the fence. Didn't mention what he was doing. Some truths couldn't be written in letters that censors would read. Stalag III-C was one of hundreds of prisoner of war camps operated by the Wehrmacht across occupied Europe. The camp system was vast. By late 1943, Germany held approximately 5 million prisoners. Soviet prisoners numbered over 3 million. Polish, French, British, American, Belgian, Dutch, Yugoslav prisoners filled dozens of camps from Pomerania to Bavaria. The Geneva Convention theoretically protected prisoners of war. Western Allied prisoners received this protection. Soviet prisoners did not. Germany had not extended Geneva Convention status to Soviets, treating them instead as political enemies and racial inferiors according to Nazi ideology. Stalag III-C held primarily Soviet and Polish prisoners. Conditions were brutal. Daily rations consisted of 300 grams of bread, watery soup made from potato peelings and turnips, occasional ersatz coffee. Malnutrition was systematic. Prisoners worked 12-hour shifts in nearby factories producing ammunition components. Those too weak to work received reduced rations. Medical care was minimal. The camp had one doctor for 6,400 prisoners. No medications beyond basic bandages. Typhus outbreaks were common. Dysentery killed consistently. The death rate averaged 15 prisoners per week. Bodies were cremated in a facility 3 kilometers from the camp. Families received no notification. Guard force numbered 280 men. Most were Wehrmacht soldiers considered unfit for frontline duty. Too old, too young, medical problems, minor disciplinary issues. Franz Weber fell into this category due to flat feet and chronic knee pain from a training injury. He would never see combat. Guard duty was his war. The guards worked in rotating shifts. 8-hour patrols around the perimeter, 4-hour tower duty, 8-hour compound supervision. Officers handled administration and discipline. Enlisted guards like Weber maintained security and enforced camp rules. Escape attempts were officially punishable by death. Camp regulations posted in German and Russian stated this clearly. Any prisoner attempting to escape will be shot without warning. The rule was enforced inconsistently. Some escape attempts ended in shooting. Others resulted in punishment barracks, solitary confinement, or reduced rations. Weber had never witnessed an execution. He'd heard about them. Other guards talked. A Soviet lieutenant shot while cutting wire in Sector 4 in August. 3 Polish prisoners shot while running toward the tree line in October. Stories circulated. Weber didn't know if they were true. What he did know was that punishment fell primarily on the prisoners. Guards who allowed escapes faced military court-martial, possible execution for dereliction of duty, or reassignment to penal battalions on the Eastern Front. The penalties were severe. Weber didn't make his decision suddenly. It wasn't a single moment of moral clarity where right and wrong became obvious. It developed gradually over months of watching prisoners die. Accumulated observations that built like sediment layers, each incident adding weight until the structure of his beliefs shifted fundamentally. In September 1943, he'd supervised a work detail at the camp's lumber yard. 15 Soviet prisoners loading timber onto carts for transport to nearby ammunition factories. The work was brutal. 8-hour shifts lifting logs that weighed 60 to 80 kilograms. No breaks except for a 10-minute pause at midday for thin soup and a piece of bread. One man collapsed during the second hour. 28 years old, Weber learned later from the prisoner manifest. Name was Yevgeny Sokolov. Former mathematics teacher from Smolensk. Captured during the Battle of Bryansk in October 1941. Had survived 2 years of captivity. Simply fell forward onto frozen ground that September afternoon. Didn't cry out. Didn't struggle. Just collapsed like something inside him had finally broken completely. Weber had rushed over. Checked for pulse. Found nothing. The man was dead before his face hit the dirt. Starvation combined with physical exhaustion combined with heart failure. The camp doctor, who examined the body 30 minutes later, wrote "natural causes" on the death certificate. The doctor was required to examine every death and document cause. Natural causes was the standard entry. Simpler than writing, systematic starvation and forced labor killed this prisoner. The man, Sokolov, was 28 years old. Weber kept thinking about that. 28. Should have had decades of life remaining. Should have returned to Smolensk after the war. Should have taught mathematics to students. Should have married, had children, grown old. Instead his body was burned in a cremation facility and his ashes scattered in an unmarked field. Weber had nightmares about that day for weeks afterward. Kept seeing Sokolov's face. The vacant expression. The way death had come so quietly and completely. In October, Weber witnessed punishment barracks discipline for the first time. A Polish prisoner named Andrzej Kowalski had stolen food from the camp kitchen. Half a loaf of bread. He'd been caught by a cook who reported him to the guard commander. Standard protocol for theft was 3 days in the isolation box. The box was a wooden crate constructed specifically for punishment. Barely large enough for a man to crouch inside with knees pulled to chest. 4 feet long, 3 feet wide, 3 feet tall. Solid wood construction with small ventilation holes drilled in the sides. No insulation. No heat. The box was placed in an open area between barracks 9 and 10 where everyone could see it. Public display of punishment. Deterrence through visible suffering. Weber wasn't assigned to guard the box but he passed it twice daily during shift changes. Saw Kowalski inside through the ventilation holes. Saw him shivering violently on the first night when temperature dropped to -5 degrees. Saw him motionless on the second day. Saw them pull him out after 72 hours. Kowalski's fingers were frostbitten black. Both hands. All 10 fingers had turned dark purple-black from tissue death. The cold had destroyed blood circulation in his extremities. The camp doctor examined him briefly and recommended immediate amputation. 2 fingers on his left hand were amputated that same afternoon. No anesthetic. The camp had no anesthetic supplies for prisoners. Only for German personnel. Kowalski screamed for 18 minutes during the procedure. Weber heard the screaming from his barracks 200 meters away. Kowalski died 4 days later from infection. The amputations had been performed with non-sterile instruments. Bacteria had entered the wounds. Sepsis killed him. Another natural causes entry in the camp death log. Weber started having trouble sleeping after that. Would lie in his bunk at night and see Kowalski's blackened fingers. Hear the screaming. Wonder what kind of world demanded finger amputations without anesthetic for stealing half a loaf of bread. In November, typhus swept through Barracks 14 with the sudden violence of disease spreading through malnourished, overcrowded populations. 27 men died in 18 days. The disease vector was lice. The prisoners had no way to maintain hygiene. No hot water for washing. No replacement clothing. Lice infested everything. Once typhus entered the population, it spread exponentially. Weber was assigned to body detail during the outbreak. His job was to help carry corpses from Barracks 14 to the collection shed. 4 bodies per day on average. Sometimes 6. The men died in their bunks and lay there until collection detail arrived each morning. The smell was overwhelming. Death has a particular odor that combines bodily waste and decaying tissue and something else indefinable. The smell soaked into Weber's uniform. Into his skin. He tried washing but couldn't get rid of it. Finally burned his uniform tunic and requested a replacement, claiming the original had been damaged during duty. He kept seeing the faces of the dead men. Young faces mostly. Teenagers. 20-year-olds. Bodies that should have been strong but were skeletal from malnutrition. Rib bones visible through skin. Hip bones protruding sharply. Arms like sticks. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were dying civilians in uniform. Human beings reduced to biological minimums. Stripped of dignity, health, hope. Weber had been raised Catholic in a region where Catholicism meant something real and daily. Sunday Mass wasn't optional. Confession every month. Evening prayers before bed. His mother had taught him that every human life had inherent value. That compassion was a virtue. That mercy towards suffering was a moral obligation. Blessed are the merciful, she'd quoted from the Beatitudes. For they shall obtain mercy. What he witnessed at Stalag III-C contradicted everything he'd been taught. Every principle his mother had instilled. Every sermon he'd heard. Every prayer he'd memorized. The systematic cruelty wasn't some unfortunate byproduct of war. It was deliberate policy. Prisoners were being worked to death and starved to death and left to die from disease because their lives had been assigned no value. Weber found himself praying more frequently. Asking God for guidance. Asking what he was supposed to do. Should he continue serving in a system he found morally intolerable? Should he request transfer? Should he sabotage operations? Should he help prisoners escape? Prayer provided no clear answers. God, if God was listening, remained silent. Weber was alone with his conscience and his doubts and the daily reality of guard duty at a camp where human beings were dying at industrial scale. He didn't consider himself a resistance fighter. Wasn't political. Didn't oppose Hitler vocally. Didn't distribute pamphlets or sabotage equipment. He was simply a guard who couldn't reconcile what he'd been taught with what he was doing. The fence decision came down to mathematics. If he reported the escape attempt, prisoners would be shot or tortured. If he ignored it, some prisoners might reach Soviet lines 90 kilometers east. They might survive. The choice seemed clear. But the risk was enormous. If discovered, Weber faced court-martial and probable execution. Dereliction of duty during wartime. Aiding the enemy. The charges would be formal and final. His family would lose their Wehrmacht support payments. His mother depended on that income. His sisters had no other support. Weber weighed this carefully. He prayed. Asked God for guidance. Received no clear answer. The moral calculus remained unchanged. He could either enable death through action or enable life through inaction. He chose inaction. On December 21, 1943, at 0445, 7 Soviet prisoners crawled beneath the northeastern fence of Stalag III-C and disappeared into the forest that bordered the camp's eastern perimeter. Weber was on duty that night. He'd begun his shift at 0400 as usual. The temperature was -21 degrees. Coldest night of December. His breath froze into ice crystals on his scarf. His rifle sling had stiffened from the cold until it felt like iron against his shoulder. He was 80 meters south of Tower 7 when the escape happened. Walking his usual patrol circuit. Moving slowly to conserve body heat and extend the time before he'd have to turn around and walk back into the wind. He heard nothing unusual. Saw nothing in the darkness. The broken searchlight on Tower 7 remained broken despite 3 weeks of maintenance promises. The sector lay in complete darkness except for ambient light from distant towers. Weber continued his patrol normally. Reached the southern end of his circuit. Turned around. Began walking back north. At 0530, he passed the escape site deliberately. Approached it from the south so anyone watching from towers 6 or 8 would see him conducting standard inspection. Fresh tracks led away from the fence into the forest. Multiple sets. Maybe 5. Maybe 7. Hard to count exactly in the dim light. The excavation beneath the wire had been completed. The trench was now 18 inches deep and 30 inches wide. Enough space for a man to squeeze through on his belly. The inner fence wire had been cut and bent back. The outer fence wire similarly cut. A clear passage through both barriers. The prisoners had worked efficiently. Probably dug for 3 or 4 hours during the night. Used improvised tools, sharpened spoons, pieces of metal, maybe the wire he'd left earlier in the week. The work showed planning and coordination. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was a calculated escape attempt prepared over multiple nights. Weber examined the scene carefully. Tracks led northeast into forest. 7 distinct paths based on boot print variations. The escapees had separated immediately after clearing the fence. Smart tactics. Harder to track multiple targets moving in different directions. He looked back toward Tower 6. The guard there, Obergefreiter Schneider, was facing west toward the main compound. Not watching this sector at all. Tower 7's guard would be cold and tired, probably stamping his feet to maintain circulation, paying more attention to his own discomfort than the ground below. Weber knelt beside the fence. Used his rifle but to disturb the surrounding snow. Made the area look less like an organized escape site and more like general disturbance from wind or animals. Kicked snow over the most obvious tracks. Broke up the clear boot print patterns so they'd be harder to identify as human movement. Then he took handfuls of loose snow and filled the excavation beneath the wire partially. Not completely. That would be suspicious. Just enough so it wouldn't look freshly dug. Made it appear as though the hole had been there for days, gradually filling naturally with windblown snow. The cut wires were harder to conceal. He couldn't do anything about those. They'd be discovered eventually. But he could make the timeline uncertain. If the escape looked a few days old rather than a few hours old, investigation would be harder. Evidence would be less clear. Weber worked for maybe 6 minutes total. Then he straightened. Continued his patrol north as though nothing unusual had occupied his attention. Maintained normal pace. Normal posture. Normal everything. At 0800, his shift ended. He walked to the guard station. Filed his shift report with Unteroffizier Brandt, the duty sergeant. Brandt was 52 years old. Career soldier who'd been wounded in France in 1914 and assigned to rear area duty ever since. He conducted paperwork with the enthusiasm of someone who'd done the same task 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. Sector report? Brandt asked without looking up from his desk. Northeastern sector quiet. No incidents, Weber said. Brandt wrote the entry into the master log. Time, 0800. Guard, Gefreiter Weber. Report, Northeastern sector quiet. No incidents. Standard entry repeated hundreds of times per week across all sectors and all shifts. Dismissed, Brandt said. Weber saluted. Left the guard station. Walked to his barracks through snow that had begun falling lightly around 0730. Fresh snow would cover any remaining tracks by noon. Nature was cooperating with concealment. He changed into off-duty clothes. Lay on his bunk. Closed his eyes. Didn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about what he'd done. What he'd enabled. 7 men were walking east through December cold with minimal food, no proper winter gear, hunted by German security forces and local police. Their chances of reaching Soviet lines 90 kilometers away were minimal. Maybe 10% survival probability. Maybe less. But 10% was better than 0. 10% was better than dying of typhus in Barracks 14 or being worked to death at the lumber yard or starving slowly on 300 grams of bread per day. Weber had given them a chance. Small. But real. The escape wasn't discovered until 1300 during the afternoon roll call. Standard procedure required counting all prisoners twice daily. Morning roll call at 0600 and afternoon roll call at 1300. The counts were conducted by barracks. Prisoners lined up outside their buildings. Guards counted systematically. Numbers were reported to the camp administration office where clerks maintained master logs. Barracks 22 reported 7 prisoners missing from the 1300 count. The barracks held 186 Soviet prisoners. Should have been 193. Was only 186. 7 unaccounted for. Camp officials initiated search protocols immediately. Emergency alarms sounded across the compound. All guards reported to stations. Prisoners were locked in barracks while guards swept the entire camp systematically. Looked in every building. Every latrine. Every storage shed. Every possible hiding place. Nothing. No prisoners hiding inside the camp perimeter. Dogs were brought in from the nearby SS training facility. German shepherds trained for tracking. The dogs were given prisoner clothing to establish scent. Then released in the compound to search. They tracked immediately to the northeastern fence. Found the excavation. Followed scent through the cut wires and into the forest beyond. The handler and 6 guards followed the dogs into the forest for 300 meters before losing the trail completely at a frozen stream where the prisoners had apparently waded through icy water to break their scent trail. Untersturmführer Heinrich Kohl, the camp security officer, was notified at 13:45. He arrived at the escape site at 14:10. Examined everything carefully. The cut wires. The excavation. The disturbed snow. The tracks leading into the forest. He ordered immediate investigation. Every guard who patrolled Sector 7 in the past week would be questioned. Every shift log would be reviewed. Every patrol report examined. Standard security investigation protocol. He interviewed every guard who'd worked the northeastern perimeter in the past week. Weber was questioned for 30 minutes on December 22. Did you observe any unusual activity in Sector 7 during your shifts? No, sir. Nothing unusual. Did you inspect the fence line thoroughly each patrol? Yes, sir. Standard inspection protocol. Did you see any signs of excavation or wire cutting? No, sir. The sector was secure. Kohl stared at Weber for 10 seconds. Weber maintained eye contact. Kept his face neutral. Showed no signs of nervousness. He'd practiced this. Knew he had to be convincing. You're dismissed, Gefreiter. Report any suspicious activity immediately in future patrols. Yes, sir. Weber left the office. Walked to his barracks. Changed into off-duty clothes. His hands didn't shake until he was alone. The camp investigation continued for 3 weeks. Guard schedules were reviewed. Patrol logs examined. Every entry Weber had made was scrutinized. Northeastern sector quiet. No incidents. The phrase appeared 47 times in his logs over the previous month. Nothing suspicious. Standard reporting. 5 other guards had also patrolled Sector 7 during the relevant period. All reported nothing unusual. The investigation concluded that the prisoners had worked quickly in a single night between tower patrols. Unlikely but possible. Bad luck. Bad timing. Not necessarily negligence. Kohl recommended increased patrols in Sector 7. Ordered immediate repair of the searchlight in Tower 7. Issued new protocols for fence inspections. No guards were disciplined. No charges filed. The investigation closed on January 14, 1944. The 7 escaped prisoners were never recaptured. Weber learned their names later from camp records. Captain Ivan Sokolov, Lieutenant Pyotr Volkov, Sergeant Mikhail Petrov, Corporal Alexei Ivanov, Private Dmitry Orlov, Private Viktor Morozov, Private Nikolai Karpov. Soviet Army. Ages ranging from 19 to 34. They walked east through forest and farmland for 11 days. Avoided roads. Traveled at night. 2 prisoners died from exposure and exhaustion. 5 reached Soviet lines near Kostrzyn on January 2, 1944. They were debriefed, treated for frostbite and malnutrition, and reassigned to new units. Weber never learned what happened to them. Never knew if they survived the war. Never received confirmation that his decision had meant anything. He simply continued his duty. Walked the perimeter every night. Filed reports. Northeastern sector quiet. No incidents. In February 1944, Weber noticed fresh marks near the fence in Sector 4. Different location. Same pattern. Someone was planning another escape. Weber didn't report it. Left wire at the fence post. Walked past without comment. On February 28, 4 more prisoners escaped through Sector 4. Weber was not on duty that night. Another guard, Oberstfreiter Klaus Hoffmann, was patrolling. Hoffmann reported nothing unusual. The investigation was brief. No guards disciplined. In March, Weber and Hoffman had a conversation. They were cleaning rifles in the armory. No one else present. Hoffman spoke quietly. The fence in Sector 4 had been worked for weeks. Weber said nothing. Continued cleaning his rifle. I saw marks. Knew what they meant. Silence. I didn't report it. Weber looked at Hoffman. Both men understood. Neither spoke further. They finished cleaning their rifles and left the armory separately. Weber never discussed the escapes with Hoffman again. Never acknowledged what they both knew. The understanding was implicit. Some truths were safer left unspoken. Between December 1943 and April 1945, approximately 43 prisoners escaped from Stalag III-C. Most were recaptured. 18 were shot during escape attempts or while fleeing. But 12 reached Soviet or Allied lines. 12 survived. Weber couldn't know which escape succeeded. Couldn't track outcomes. Could only maintain his routine. Walk the fence. Note the marks. Leave wire. Cover tracks. File reports that said nothing happened. Other guards noticed. Not everyone. But some. Weber observed patterns. Certain guards always reported suspicious activity. Others didn't. The camp had invisible fault lines. Men who followed orders completely and men who followed them selectively. Weber estimated that perhaps 6 guards out of 280 were doing what he was doing. Enabling escapes through strategic blindness. They never met. Never formed a group. Never discu. Military discipline requires obedience. Soldiers follow orders. The system functions through strict hierarchical control. Weber understood this completely. He'd been trained in it for 3 years. But human conscience operates on different principles. Conscience asks whether orders are just. Whether obedience serves morality or undermines it. These questions create tension between duty and ethics. Weber experienced this tension daily. Every time he walked past evidence of escape preparations, he chose conscience over duty. But he also continued serving. Continued wearing the uniform. Continued collecting Wehrmacht pay. Continued participating in a system he increasingly found morally intolerable. This wasn't resistance in the traditional sense. Weber didn't sabotage equipment. Didn't organize rebellion. Didn't distribute anti-Nazi literature. He simply chose not to see certain things. Selective blindness. Calculated negligence. Psychologists would later describe this as moral disengagement. The process by which individuals reconcile participation in harmful systems while maintaining positive self-image. Weber remained a good Catholic who attended church when permitted. Wrote affectionate letters to his mother. Helped fellow guards with personal problems. Saw himself as fundamentally decent. The contradiction never resolved. Weber was simultaneously perpetrator and resistor. Guard and enabler. Participant and saboteur. Human moral complexity doesn't fit simple categories. Most people during wartime weren't purely good or purely evil. They were complex individuals making difficult choices in impossible circumstances. Weber made one choice, to let prisoners escape. But he made another choice too, to remain in position, to continue serving, to maintain the system that imprisoned and killed thousands. Both choices coexisted. Neither canceled the other. On April 20, 1945, Weber received orders to evacuate Stalag III-C. The Soviet army was advancing rapidly from the east. German forces were collapsing across the region. The camp was to be abandoned. All prisoners would be marched west toward German interior. The death marches of April 1945 were among the war's final atrocities. Tens of thousands of prisoners were forced to walk hundreds of kilometers with minimal food, no medical care, no shelter. Those who collapsed were shot. Thousands died. Weber was assigned to guard a column of 600 Soviet prisoners. They marched west on April 21. The first day, 14 prisoners collapsed from exhaustion. Guards shot 11. 3 were left to die by the roadside. On April 22, Weber's column stopped near a small village. Prisoners were held in a barn overnight. Weber was assigned perimeter guard. At 0200, he heard movement at the barn's rear entrance. Went to investigate. Found 8 prisoners attempting to escape through a damaged wall. Weber stood there with his rifle. The prisoners froze. For 30 seconds, no one moved. Weber looked at them. Young men. Skeletal. Desperate. They looked back at him with the kind of exhaustion that transcends fear. Weber lowered his rifle. Pointed toward the forest. Said nothing. The 8 prisoners ran. He waited 2 minutes, then fired 3 shots into the air. Shouted, "Halt!" Fired twice more. Then returned to his post. Filed a report at 0230. Attempted escape at rear entrance. Warning shots fired. Prisoners fled into forest. The investigation was perfunctory. April 1945 investigations were brief. Germany was dying. Nobody cared about escaped prisoners anymore. On April 26, Weber's column was overrun by Soviet forces near Kustrin. German guards were ordered to surrender. Some fled. Others fought briefly and died. Weber put down his rifle and raised his hands. He was processed as a prisoner of war. Spent 2 years in Soviet captivity. Worked in reconstruction labor details. Released in August 1947. Returned to Bavaria. Found his mother and sisters alive. His family home was damaged but standing. He resumed civilian life. Worked as a carpenter. Got married in 1950. Had 3 children. Never spoke about the war. Never told his wife about the escapes he'd enabled. Never sought recognition or acknowledgement. In 1978, 33 years after the war ended, Weber received a letter. It came from Moscow. No return address. Inside was a single photograph showing 5 men standing in front of an apartment building. On the back, someone had written in Russian, "Kostrazin, January 1944. Thank you." Weber didn't recognize the faces. Didn't know which prisoners they were. Couldn't verify their identity. But he understood the message. Some of the men he'd helped had survived. They remembered. He burned the photograph. Never mentioned it to anyone. The secret remained secret. Franz Weber died in 1989 at age 70. His death certificate listed cause of death as heart failure. Natural causes. His funeral was attended by family, neighbors, fellow carpenters. No military honors. He'd never applied for veterans' benefits. Never joined veteran organizations. Never displayed his Wehrmacht service record. His family found his wartime documents while sorting his possessions. Service record. Assignment papers. Letters from his mother. Nothing unusual. Nothing indicating what he'd done at Stalag III-C. But in a locked metal box in his workshop, they found a piece of thin wire. 12 inches long. Carefully wrapped in cloth. No explanation. No note. Just the wire. They threw it away. Nobody knows exactly how many prisoners Franz Weber helped escape. He never kept count. Never documented his actions. Never discussed them. The number could be 7. Could be 12. Could be 20. The evidence doesn't exist. What does exist are Soviet military records showing that between January and April 1945, 47 former Stalag III-C prisoners returned to Soviet lines after escaping German captivity. Their debriefing reports describe various escape methods. Several mention guards who looked the other way or didn't notice obvious signs. These testimonies are vague. No names. No specific locations. Just hints that not all German guards enforced security equally. That some men chose calculated blindness over rigid compliance. Weber was one of these men. Perhaps the only one. Perhaps one of several. The historical record can't confirm either way. What we can confirm is that small acts of selective disobedience occurred throughout the war. Not just at Stalag III-C. At camps across Europe. Guards who didn't report every suspicious activity. Administrators who lost paperwork that would have condemned prisoners. Clerks who miscoded documents that protected refugees. Civilians who hid fugitives and lied to investigators. These weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They didn't fight. Didn't overthrow regimes. Didn't change policy. They simply found small spaces within oppressive systems where individual conscience could operate quietly. These small spaces saved lives. The question Franz Weber's story raises is uncomfortable. What constitutes moral action within immoral systems? Is participation in a brutal system justified if you occasionally undermine it? Does enabling some escapes excuse contributing to an institution that killed thousands? There's no clean answer. Weber remained a Wehrmacht guard. Collected pay from a genocidal regime. Participated in a POW camp system that systematically starved and killed prisoners. His occasional acts of mercy don't erase this participation. But those acts mattered enormously to the men who escaped because of them. To Ivan Sokolov, to Pyotr Volkov, to the others whose names we don't know. Weber's selective blindness represented the difference between death and life. Perhaps that's the only honest conclusion. Weber was neither hero nor villain. He was a man in an impossible position who occasionally chose conscience over compliance. His actions were inadequate to the scale of evil surrounding him. But they were something. And something was better than nothing. The photograph sent from Moscow in 1978 suggests that at least some prisoners understood this nuance. They didn't glorify Weber. Didn't call him a savior. Just sent a photograph and 2 words, thank you. Gratitude for small mercies in a time when mercy was rare. The wire Franz Weber kept in the locked box was probably from Stalag III-C. The same wire he'd left at the fence posts in December 1943. The evidence of what he'd done, kept secret for 44 years. Why did he keep it? Perhaps as a reminder. Perhaps as proof to himself that he'd done something. Perhaps simply because he couldn't forget. The wire is gone now. Thrown away by family members who didn't understand its significance. But its existence proves that Weber never forgot what he'd done. Never moved past it completely. Carried the weight of those nights walking the perimeter fence for the rest of his life. The escaped prisoners, those who survived, returned to Soviet society. Fought in subsequent battles. Some died before war's end. Others lived into old age. They had families. Children. Grandchildren. Lives that wouldn't have existed without a German guard who chose not to see. Their descendants live today. Somewhere in Russia. Ordinary people with no knowledge that their existence traces back to a December night in 1943 when one man left wire at a fence post and walked away. History is filled with these invisible connections. Small decisions that cascade through generations. A guard who ignores evidence. Prisoners who take a chance. Survival that branches into futures neither party will ever know about. Franz Weber never learned what happened to the men he helped. Never knew if his decision mattered in any meaningful way. He simply made choices in darkness and lived with them in silence. The secret remained secret. The guard who let prisoners escape, and no one ever found out. Except now you do.